Della Ransome stood in the square and watched the town of Dry Fork hang her husband for a murder he did not do. She did not scream. She held the fence rail until the wood cut her palm. The morning was already hot. 40 townsfolk stood in the dust and looked at the scaffold, and looked away, and looked back. Sheriff Amos Crandall climbed the steps with a paper in his hand. He read the charge slow, so the whole square could hear it. Then he folded the paper and looked out over the crowd. "A well-digger who kills a land agent," he said, "hangs like any other man." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The trapdoor dropped. 3 weeks later, a man in a brown robe met her at the churchyard gate. He pressed something warm into her hand. It was a wedding band, scratched along one edge, and she knew the scratch. She knew the weight of it. "Come to San Ismael," the brother said, low, close to her ear. "Before the judge rides in, tell no one." Then he was gone through the gate and into the dark, and she stood there with her hand closed tight, and she did not yet dare to open it. If you have ever been told to bury a truth before you were ready to let it go, this story is for you. Before we go on, do one small thing for me. Tap subscribe, and in the comments tell me the town you're watching from. I want to see how far Della's story rides. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to a valley of red rock and one sweet well, and a marriage that the law tried to end and could not. Elias and Della Ransome dug the only sweet water well in the Seco Valley with their own hands. That is where you have to start. Not with the rope, with the water. It was 1884, and the Arizona Territory was in the third year of a drought that had turned the grass to wire and the creeks to cracked mud. Cattle died standing up. Families loaded wagons and left claims their fathers had bled for. But the Ransome place held. 320 acres of red section land, and in the middle of it, Seco Springs. A slow, cold rising of water that never quit, not in the worst August anybody could remember. The well had not always been there. That was the thing the town forgot when it was convenient to forget. Elias found the seep himself, 10 years back, on a hunch and a willow rod and a stubbornness that Della had married him partly for. He dug. She hauled. They lined the shaft with stone hauled by mule from the wash, one flat rock at a time, until their hands were the hands of laboring people and would be for the rest of their lives. When the water came up clear and sweet, they did not celebrate loud. Elias sat on the lip of the well and looked down into the dark and cried a little, and Della sat beside him and let him. After that, Dry Fork drank Ransome water and did not always thank them for it. In a wet year, nobody thinks about the well. In a dry year, the well is everything, and everything a man wants. Another man wants too. They were married 19 years by then. She was 41, brown from the sun, wide and strong through the shoulders from a life of hauling. Her hair had begun to gray at the temples, and she did not care. Elias was 46, lean, quiet, with a well-digger's arms and a way of thinking a long time before he answered a question. He wore a wedding band she had bought him with egg money the second year, plain gold, and he had never once taken it off. Not to dig. Not to sleep. When his knuckles swelled in the cold, he would grease his finger with lard rather than slip the ring, and she used to laugh at him for it. "You'll lose that finger before you lose that ring," she told him. "Then I'll lose the finger," he said, and meant it. That was the shape of them. Not romantic in the way of songs, romantic in the way of two people who had dug a well together and knew what the other could carry. She had her own habit. Every night, no matter the season, Della set a lamp in the front window and let it burn low till she was sure Elias was home from wherever the waterwork had taken him. A man could get turned around out on the section line in the dark, or a horse could throw a shoe, or a storm could come up off the rim. The lamp was for him. Come home. Follow the light in. 19 years and she never missed a night. He used to say he could find that window from the far ridge, one gold point in the black, and steer to it like a sailor to a star. There is one more thing from those good years, and I need you to hold on to it, because it will matter more than anything else in this story. One evening, an ordinary evening, nothing wrong in the world, Elias was cleaning a rifle at the kitchen table, and out of a long silence he said, "Della, if anything ever happens to me, the truth is with the brothers at San Ismael." She looked up. "What kind of talk is that?" "Just talk," he said. "A man ought to have a place to put a thing he can't carry." San Ismael was the old Spanish mission out past the salt flats, a day's ride southwest, where Father Tom's and a handful of brothers kept goats and grew beans and buried the poor for free. Elias hauled water out there twice a year and would not take pay for it. She thought his words were only a church-going man's way of talking, a settled man making peace with his own mortality the way settled men do. She poured his coffee and told him not to be morbid. He smiled and let it drop. She did not know she had just been handed the whole thing. Neither did he, not really. But the truth was with the brothers at San Ismael. Remember that. Now the trouble. The trouble had a face, and the face belonged to Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a land speculator out of the territorial capital, 44, soft-handed, well-dressed for a country of dust. He came to Dry Fork the way a buzzard comes to a slow animal, early, patient, circling. He bought up failing claims for pennies and held them. And he understood a thing that most of the drying-out homesteaders did not understand until it was too late. In a drought, land is worthless. Water is not. And whoever holds the water holds the land around it, whether they own that land or not. He wanted Seco Springs. He wanted it the way another kind of man wants a woman he cannot have, badly, and without much thought about the cost. He came to the Ransome place twice with offers. Elias walked him off both times, polite the first time, less polite the second. "It's not for sale," Elias said. "It won't be for sale. My wife and I dug it. We'll die owning it." Thorne smiled and touched his hat and rode off, and a smart man watching would have felt the cold come off him. Then there was the land agent, Josiah Vane. Vane was a territorial man too, a filing clerk and surveyor who rode the section lines and recorded who owned what and carried a leather field ledger everywhere he went. He was not a good man exactly, but he was a careful one, and careful men write things down. Vane had been out at the Ransome section line more than once that summer, walking the lines, making his small, precise notes. Thorne and Vane were seen together in the territory. Then they were seen arguing. Then Vane was seen no more. They found Josiah Vane on the Ransome section line on a Tuesday morning, shot once through the chest, lying in the red dirt not 200 yards from where Elias had a spade and a set of well tools laid out for the day's work. The murder pistol lay in the dirt beside the tools, as if it had been set there, as if a child had arranged it to be found. Sheriff Amos Crandall arrested Elias Ransome within the hour. Within the hour. Hold that. A land agent lies dead on the open range, and inside 60 minutes the sheriff has ridden out, decided the whole matter, and put irons on a man who has dug half the wells in the county. No search of the country for other tracks. No question about the two men who had been seen arguing. No wonder at all that the killer would leave his pistol lying next to his own tools like a signed confession. Just the arrest, fast and smooth, like a thing already written down, and only now being read aloud. Crandall was 50, big through the belly, with a badge he had worn 11 years and a certainty about himself that no fact had ever dented. He liked to be the man who settled things. He liked the weight of the word of the law in his mouth. And he had a habit, which the honest people of Dry Fork knew and did not say out loud, of coming into money at strange times. After a foreclosure, after a claim changed hands, after a problem went away. 2 days after the arrest, Marcus Thorne came to see Della Ransome. He came to the house. He stood in her kitchen, in her home, with her husband in the Dry Fork jail, and he took off his hat and turned it in his soft hands and told her how sorry he was for her troubles. Then he did a thing she would not forgive for a long time. He offered to buy the springs. "I know how this will go, Mrs. Ransome," he said, gentle as a preacher. "I have seen it before. A man in your husband's position, the courts are hard, the outcome is not in doubt. You'll be a widow with a claim you cannot work and a bank that will not wait. I want to spare you that. I'll give you $6,400 for the Springs section. Cash? Today, it's kindness, is what it is. $6,400. For a claim worth twice that in a wet year and 10 times that in a dry one, and offered before the trial, before the verdict, before her husband had spent a full week behind bars, offered to a widow, who was not yet a widow, by a man who spoke of the outcome as a thing already settled. She was grieving and frightened, and she was not stupid. She looked at the sum, and she looked at his soft hands, and she felt something turn over cold in her chest. He knew, somehow, this man knew how it would end before the law had said a word. She did not take the money. She asked him to leave her house. He put his hat back on and said, "The offer won't stand forever," and went. She stood at the window a long time after that. The lamp was not lit, it was daytime. But she stood at the window the way she stood at it, in the dark. And she thought, something is wrong here. Something is wrong under the wrongness. And she did not yet have a name for it. The audience knows the name. You have known it since the pistol lay too neat in the dirt. But Della did not yet, and the not knowing is where the fear lives. The trial was quick, the way the arrest had been quick. A territorial magistrate, a jury of men who needed the water and were afraid of the man who might soon control it, and a sheriff who told a clean, simple story about a well digger who fought with a land agent and shot him and was too dull to hide the gun. Elias said little. He was a quiet man in the best of times, and this was the worst. When they asked him to speak for himself, he said only, "I did not kill Josiah Vane, and God and one honest man know it." Nobody asked who the one honest man was. That is the kind of thing that gets asked in a court that wants the truth. This court wanted it over. They sentenced him to hang. Now we come to the square, and I will not rush it, because Della did not get to rush it. She had to stand and live every second of it, and so will we. They built the scaffold in the town square, in front of the mercantile and the bank and the church, so the whole of Dry Fork could see the law done. The morning came hot and still. 40 people gathered. These were not strangers. These were the people who drank ransom water. The blacksmith whose horse Elias had watered free in the worst of the drought. The Hendricks family whose children were alive because the springs held when their own well went dry. The mercantile man. The banker. 40 faces Della had known for 19 years, standing in the dust, watching. Della stood at the fence rail near the front. She wore her one good dark dress. She had decided, somewhere in the long, sleepless nights, that she would not give this town the sight of her breaking. Whatever else they took, they would not take that. So she stood straight, and she held the rail, and she looked at her husband. They brought Elias up the steps. He was thin from 3 weeks of jail food, and his hands were tied, but he walked steady, and when he reached the top, he found her face in the crowd right away, the way he had always found the lamp in the window. He looked at her. Just at her. Not at the rope, not at the sheriff, not at the 40 people who had come to watch, at her. And his lips moved. It was small. It was fast. But she had read his mouth across a noisy supper table for 19 years, and she read it now. 2 words. The brothers. The brothers. She did not understand. Not then. But she carried the words down into herself and held them the way she held the rail. Crandall saw it. Crandall stepped between them, big and quick, and put his body where her line to Elias had been, and started reading the charge again loud, drowning whatever else her husband might have shaped with his mouth. He read it to the end. He looked out at the crowd. He said the thing about the well digger hanging like any other man, and Della gripped the rail so hard a splinter of the old gray wood drove up under the skin of her palm, and she felt nothing at all. The trapdoor dropped. She did not scream. I told you that at the start, and I am telling you again because it is the center of her. 40 people flinched and made a sound, one low sound like a wind, and Della Ransome stood at the rail and did not scream and did not fall. She held on. She held on. A thin line of blood ran down her wrist from the splinter and dripped off the heel of her hand into the dust, and she stood there and held on until it was over, and the body was still. Then the brothers of San Ismael came for him. This was not strange, and that is why it worked. Elias had hauled water to the mission for years without pay. It was known that he had a bond with those quiet men out past the salt flats. So when Father Tom's and 2 brothers drove a plain wagon into the square and asked, humbly, for the body of Elias Ransome to bury him in consecrated ground at the mission, since the town would give a hanged man no church plot, nobody thought a thing of it. It was charity. It was the church doing what the church does with the outcast dead. Crandall waved it through. He was glad, in truth, to have the body and the widow and the whole ugly business carted out of his town and buried a day's ride away where it would trouble no one. They laid Elias in a plain pine coffin. They loaded the coffin in the wagon. Father Tom's said a low word to Della at the graveside of the town, for they let her come that far, and then the wagon rolled out of Dry Fork to the southwest, toward the salt flats and the old mission, and the dust closed behind it. Della went home to a house with no husband in it. She lit the lamp in the window that night out of 19 years of habit before she remembered there was no one coming home to steer by it. She left it burning anyway. She did not know why. She would not have been able to tell you why. Now watch the clues, because from here the story tells the audience things before it tells Della, and that gap is the whole engine. In the days after the burial, small strange things began to gather at the edge of Dry Fork like moths at a screen. The grave never settled. Out at San Ismael, the brothers had dug a grave and mounded it, as brothers do. But a passing sheepherder who cut through the mission land remarked, later at the trading post, that the Ransome grave was odd, that the earth on it was loose and returned, not packed and sunk the way a 3-week grave ought to be, as if it had been dug and filled, and something about it kept being disturbed. He said it the way men say a small thing, not knowing it is a large thing. The rations were wrong. The trading post at the crossroads kept a ledger too, the way careful places do, and the man who ran it noticed that one of the San Ismael brothers had begun buying more than before. Beans, flour, coffee, dried meat, and buying it in a portion for 2 men where the mission's needs had always run one steady line. The brothers were poor and ate little and shared everything. Why, of a sudden? Double. The trading post man mentioned it to no one in particular. But he noticed. And the lamp. A drover moving cattle by night on the mission road, trying to spare his thirsty stock the day heat, swore he saw a lamp burning in the window of the mission infirmary in the small hours. Low, steady, gold, burning all night in the little stone sick room where the brothers tended the dying. He thought nothing of it. Someone was ill. Someone was being nursed. But a lamp burning all night means a body worth sitting up for. A lamp burning all night means someone is keeping watch over a life. You have already put it together. A returned grave. Rations for 2. A vigil lamp in the sick room of a mission that took in a hanged man's body and asked no pay. You know what those 3 things spell when you lay them side by side. The audience knows, at about this point, the thing that Della does not, that out past the salt flats, in a cool stone room lit by a low gold lamp, something is alive that the town of Dry Fork believes it buried. But Della was not out at the mission. Della was in Dry Fork, and Dry Fork was closing its hand around her. The recorder came to see her. Not unkindly, he was a small tired man doing a small tired job, but the law does not stop for grief. With Elias Ransome legally dead, the recorder explained, the estate entered probate. The debts came due. And there was a debt. There was, it turned out, a bank claim against the Springs section, a note Della had never fully understood, drawn up in a lean year, and now called in with a speed that smelled of arrangement. $6,400 owed, the very figure to the dollar, that Marcus Thorne had offered her in her own kitchen. And with Elias dead and the note called, the estate would be forced to sale. Thorne, holding a deed to the Springs, a deed Della had never seen signed, never known existed, stood first in line to take it. The recorder told her the timeline in his flat, sorry voice. 14 days. In 14 days the estate would close, the forced sale would finalize, and Seco Springs. The water she and Elias had dug with their own 4 hands, stone by mule, would pass out of Ransome hands forever, and into the soft hands of Marcus Thorne. 14 days to lose everything. And running against it, though she did not yet know to count it, another clock. The circuit judge, Harlan Pryor, was due to ride into Dry Fork on his slow rounds to hear the territory's backed-up cases. He was 11 days out. 11 days. The one man in the country whose word could open a closed case matched against 14 days until the case was closed forever. 11 against 14. 3 days of daylight between justice and the grave. But Della did not know Pryor was coming, and she did not know why it should matter, and she went home again to her lamplit window with a banknote in her apron pocket and nothing in the world to fight it with. She almost gave up. I will not pretend she did not. There was a night, about then, when she sat at the kitchen table where Elias had cleaned his rifle and said his strange soft words, and she put her head down on her arms and thought, take the money. Sign it over. He is gone, and the water cannot bring him back, and I am tired down to the bone. Let Thorne have it. Let it all be over. And then her hand, resting on the table, touched the place where his hand used to rest, and she remembered the 2 words his lips had shaped on the scaffold in front of God and 40 people, and a sheriff who tried to smother them. The brothers. And she remembered a settled man at this same table saying, the truth is with the brothers at San Ismael. And she did not know what it meant, but she knew, all at once, that she could not sign anything away until she had ridden out past the salt flats and asked. She was still gathering the courage when the brother came to the churchyard gate. It was 3 weeks to the day since the hanging. She had gone to the Dry Fork churchyard in the evening, not to any grave, since Elias was buried at the mission, but to sit near the stones of her own dead, her mother, a child lost young, the ordinary company of the bereaved. She was leaving at dusk when a man stepped out of the shadow of the gate. Brown robe, hood back, a young brother she half recognized from the burial wagon. He did not give his name. He came close, and he took her hand, and he pressed something into it, something warm from being carried against a body all day. Come to San Ismael, he said, low and fast, before the judge rides in. Tell no one. And then, before she could speak, he was through the gate and gone into the falling dark, robe and all, like something she might have dreamed. She opened her hand under the last of the light. A wedding band. Plain gold, worn thin on the inside, from 19 years of a working man's finger. And along one edge, a scratch, a deep gouge she knew, that Elias had put there himself the year they dug the well, when the ring caught on a stone in the shaft and he came up cursing and laughing with his hand bleeding, and the ring saved, and the scratch in it forever. She had held that ring 1,000 times. She had bought it with egg money. There was no ring like it in the world, and there was no man who would take it off a living hand, because the man who wore it had sworn he would lose the finger first. She stood in the churchyard with the band in her palm and her heart going like a hammer, because there were only 2 ways this ring could have come off her husband's finger, and one of them she could not let herself think. She did not sleep. Before first light, she saddled the mare, put the band on a cord around her neck under her dress where it lay against her skin, and rode southwest out of Dry Fork toward the Salt Flats and the old mission, past the counting clocks and the closing hand of the town, toward whatever the brothers were keeping in a cool stone room behind a low gold lamp. The ride was a long day. The Salt Flats threw the heat up white, and the mare labored, and Della did not push her, because there was nothing to do at the end of this ride but find out, and she was afraid of finding out, and she was more afraid of not. She thought about the 2 words. She thought about the ring. She thought about a settled man saying the truth is with the brothers, and about a hanged man's lips moving, and about a grave that would not settle, and rations bought for 2. Though she had not heard those last things, only the audience had, and still, somehow, riding. She felt the shape of a hope so terrible she could barely let it into her chest. San Ismael rose up out of the flats at the end of the day, low and pale, adobe gone gold in the last light, a bell in a broken tower, goats in a pen, beans in rows, and one column of thin smoke standing straight up in the dead calm air. Father Tom's met her in the yard. He was old, brown, still, with eyes that had buried a great many people and lied to no one. He did not look surprised to see her. He looked, if anything, relieved, the way a man looks when a thing he has carried too long can finally be set down. "He said you would come when it was time," Father Tom said. "Who did?" Della said, though her voice already knew, and her hand had already risen to the cord at her neck where the band hung warm against her. The old priest did not answer with words. He turned and walked toward the low stone building at the end of the row, the infirmary, the sick room, and Della followed on legs that had gone strange under her, and a brother opened the wooden door. And out of the cool dark came the smell of tallow and herbs and sickness and life. It was dim inside after the white glare of the flats. A single lamp burned low on a shelf, gold, steady. The drover's lamp, the vigil lamp, though Della did not know to call it that. It took her eyes a moment. There was a cot against the far wall. There was a shape on the cot, thin, propped up on the mission's rough pillows, a blanket to the waist. There was a man. He turned his head toward the door. The lamplight moved on his face. It was gaunt, hollowed out, 3 weeks thinner than she had ever seen it, and around his throat, above the collar of a borrowed nightshirt, ran a raw dark line, healing but terrible, the mark of a rope. His eyes found her the way they had always found her, across the noisy table, across the crowded square, one gold point in the black. "Della," said Elias Ransome, in a voice worn to a rasp by the thing that had been done to his throat. "Della, you came." She did not scream. She had not screamed at the scaffold, and she did not scream now, but for the opposite reason. She crossed the little room without knowing she had crossed it, and went down on her knees by the cot and put both her rough hands on his gaunt living face, and she felt the warmth of him, the breath of him, the pulse ticking in his ruined neck under her thumb, and the sound that came out of her was not a scream. It was lower than that, and older, and it had no name. He was alive. Her husband was alive. The town had hanged him, and 40 people had watched the trapdoor drop, and she had stood at the rail and bled into the dust, and here, a day's ride past the salt flats, in a cool stone room behind a low gold lamp, Elias Ransome was breathing. She could not speak for a long time. Neither could he. He lifted one hand, thin, shaking, the knuckles too big now for the flesh, and touched her wet face, and she caught that hand and turned it and looked at it, and the finger was bare. The finger that had worn the ring for 19 years, that he had swibbed before he would lose before the ring, was bare, with only a pale band of untanned skin to show where it had been. She reached up to the cord at her neck. She drew out the wedding band, warm from her skin. And with hands that shook so hard she nearly dropped it, she slid it back onto his finger where it belonged, past the swollen knuckle, home, and closed his fist around nothing and held it closed in both her hands. "You never take it off," she said, and it broke on the last word. "You said you'd lose the finger first." "I didn't take it off," Elias whispered. "They took it off me. To send to you. So you would believe it was me, and come, and not tell a living soul." His ruined voice caught. His eyes moved past her to the old priest standing in the doorway, and back to her face, and something came into them that was not joy, that was, under the joy, a deep and careful fear. "Della, listen to me. I don't have long to be a secret. And there's not a soul in the world can know I'm breathing, not yet, not until the right man hears the whole of it." His fist tightened in her hands. "Because I know who killed Josiah Vane. I saw it done. And the man who did it is going to take our water in 11 days, unless you and I are smarter and quieter than we have ever been in our lives." The lamp burned low and steady in the little stone room. Outside, the last light died off the salt flats, and somewhere back in Dry Fork a recorder's clock ticked down toward a forced sale, and a sheriff slept easy in the certainty that a dead man tells no tale, and did not yet know, could not yet know, that the tale was sitting up in a mission sick room with a rope scar on its throat and its wedding band back on its finger, getting ready, at last, to be told. The lamp did not go out that night, and neither did she. Della sat on the stool by the cot and watched her husband breathe, the way a woman watches a fire she is afraid to leave. Every rise of his chest was a small argument against everything she had believed for 3 weeks. The law had spoken. The town had watched. She had held the fence rail until it cut her hand, and here he lay, thin as a fence post, the rope scar a purple cord around his throat, breathing. "Tell me the rest," she said. "All of it." So he told her. He told her about the ledger. Josiah Vane had carried a leather field book on every survey, and in it he wrote down every line he walked and every deed he filed. Vane was a crooked man, Elias said, but a careful one, and careful men keep records. In that book was the Springs section, and beside it, in Vane's own hand, a note that the deed to Seco Springs had been drawn up and filed before Elias ever missed a payment. Drawn up for Marcus Thorne. Signed with a name that was not Della's, though it was meant to look like hers. "Thorne forged the sale before the murder," Elias whispered. Vane wrote it down. That's why Vane died. He got greedy, or he got scared, and he was going to talk. I came up over the section line and I saw Thorne do it. I saw him put the pistol on Vane and fire. Then Thorne saw me. Della's hands had gone cold. And he let you hang for it. He dropped the pistol in the dirt by my tools and he rode. And Crandall was there inside the hour. Elias closed his eyes. "Too fast, Della. A man doesn't ride out to a section line inside the hour unless he knew where to ride." She sat very still. Outside, the salt flats gave off their faint pale light, and somewhere a nightbird called once and went quiet. "The pistol," she said. "You said the pistol." I grabbed it up before Crandall came. I knew what it was worth. Engraved on the grip, 2 letters, MT, Marcus Thorne. A gambling man's pistol. A ghost of the old dry humor moved his mouth and died. I buried it. Both of them. The pistol and the ledger, wrapped in oilcloth, under the 3rd cistern here at the mission. The night before they took me, I rode out and I hid them where no man would think to look. I told you once, if anything ever happened to me, the truth was with the brothers at San Ismael. You thought I meant my soul. I thought you were being a church-going man. Her voice broke on it. I thought it was talk. It was a map, Elias said. I just couldn't draw it plainer without giving it away. They did not sleep. Toward the gray hour before dawn, when the lamp had burned down to a thumb of oil, Elias put his scarred hands on the edge of the cot and pushed himself up. Father Toms came in the doorway to stop him, and stopped himself instead, because he saw the same thing Della saw. The man was going to the cistern, whether his legs held or not. They went out together, into the cold. The mission yard was blue with the coming light, the adobe walls the color of old bone. The third cistern sat against the south wall, a low round mouth of fitted stone, dry these 3 years of drought like everything else. Elias knelt at its base. He would not let Della dig. This was his to do, he said, and she understood him, and let him. He worked the flat stones loose one at a time with his fingers and a trowel a brother brought, and his breath sawed in his ruined throat, and twice he had to stop and press his hand to the ground and wait for the yard to stop turning. Then his fingers found the oilcloth. He drew it up out of the earth like a man drawing water at last from a dry well. He unwrapped it there on his knees in the blue dawn. Vane's field ledger, the leather gone stiff, the pages dry and whole, and the pistol, dull with dirt, the 2 letters biting up out of the grip when Della rubbed her thumb across it. MT. There, Elias said, and his voice had nothing in it but tiredness, not triumph, just a man who had carried a stone a long way and set it down. There's the whole of it. Now we have to put it in front of a man who has to look. Judge Harlan Pryor was 11 days out when Della rode to the mission. He was 9 days out now. And the recorder's clock in Dry Fork was ticking down its 14 days toward a forced sale, and the 2 numbers were closing on each other like 2 riders on one road. And whichever reached the town first would decide whether Della Ransome kept her water or lost it forever. They had to move a living man and a leather book across 60 miles of open country, and every mile of it belonged to Amos Crandall. The brothers made a plan the way they made everything, slow and sure, and out loud around the plank table in the refectory. Father Tom's would send a courier ahead, a young brother on the fastest mule, to catch Judge Pryor on his circuit and beg him to hear the matter the day he rode in, before the recorder could close the sale. The ledger would go with the courier, copied first by the mission's own hand, so that if one was lost, the other lived. Elias and Della and the pistol would follow in the mission wagon, Elias covered and hidden, moving only by night, coming into Dry Fork just before the session opened. It was a good plan. It lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, a deputy rode into the mission yard. Della was in the infirmary when the brother came running, and there was no time. Father Tom's did not run. He met the deputy in the yard with his hands folded in his sleeves and asked, in the mild voice of an old man who has nothing to hide, what the county wanted with a mission. And 2 brothers, quick and quiet, got Elias up the narrow ladder into the bell tower, and Della pulled the blanket smooth on the empty cot and sat down on it and took up a rosary she did not know how to use and bent her head over it. The deputy walked the mission. He looked in the chapel. He looked in the refectory and the cells and the kitchen. He came into the infirmary with his hat still on and his spurs loud on the stone, and Della kept her eyes down and her lips moving. He stood in the doorway a long moment. On the shelf the vigil lamp burned low and gold. On the floor by the cot, where it had fallen in the scramble and no one had seen it, lay the cord with the wedding band, coiled small and bright against the dark stone. The deputy's eyes went over the room, over the cot, over the lamp, over the widow praying. He did not look down. "Sheriff Crandall's paying coin," he said to the room, "for word of anybody digging where they shouldn't, anybody selling old stories, anybody stirring up the Ransome business." He waited. Della's beads clicked. "You're the widow." "I am," Della said, and did not lift her head, because she did not trust her face. "My condolences," the deputy said, in a voice that had none, and turned on his heel, and his spurs rang away across the yard. And up in the bell tower a man with a rope scar on his throat stood in the dark against a bell that could not be allowed to ring, and breathed 100 yards from a lawman who would have hanged him twice. When the hoofbeats had gone, Della picked the cord up off the floor. Her hands shook so that the band swung and struck the stone once. A small, clear sound. She had left it lying in plain sight of the law. Another second of the deputy's eyes turned down, and it would have ended there. She hung it back around her neck and did not tell Elias how close it had come. There was no profit in the telling. The town, in those days, mourned her. Word of it came back to the mission through the trading post and the drovers. The widow Ransome had gone off to the mission to grieve, they said, and hadn't come back. And wasn't it a shame? First the husband, and now she'd taken herself off to the sisters. A woman broke clean in half by sorrow. They pitied her at the store counter. They shook their heads over her at the church door. And her husband lay a day's ride off, alive, cutting the pages of a dead man's ledger against the county recorder's own filings by lamplight, building the thing that would bury the men who buried him. The ledger told true. That was the part that mattered, and Elias made sure of it before he would risk a mile of road. Vane had written the Springs deed as filed on a date, and a brother who had once clerked for a land office walked the numbers, and the date in Vane's book was 11 days before the murder, and 3 weeks before Thorne ever offered Della $1. A deed cannot be filed by a widow who is not yet a widow, for a husband who is not yet dead, over a section she never signed away. On paper it was a lie that argued with itself. Put beside the county recorder's own record, which any judge could send for and read. The forgery came apart like wet paper. "It's enough," Elias said, when the last number was checked. "It's more than enough." A blind man could read it. He looked at Della across the table, at the pistol between them, at the ledger. Now it just has to reach a man with the power to act on it before the 14 days run out. The courier went out that night on the fast mule with the copied pages sewn into his coat, and 2 days later, the numbers on the road ran out of room. Crandall moved first. Whether he heard a whisper or only felt the wind change, the sheriff went to the recorder and moved the sale forward. The drovers brought that word too, and it landed in the refectory like a dropped plate. The forced sale of Seco Springs, set for 14 days, was pulled up to coincide with the judge's own session. Crandall's gamble, plainly, that if the estate closed the same hour the judge rode in, then whatever a grieving widow tried to say would be talk over a thing already done, ink already dry, water already thorns. And Crandall posted men on the mission road. "He's not hunting a ghost anymore," Elias said quietly. "He's covering a bet. That's a frightened man's move, Della. Frightened men make the loud mistakes." But frightened or not, his men were on the road, and the road was the only way to town. They went by night, the wagon riding easy on the good axle. Elias laid flat in the bed under a canvas, with the ledger against his chest, and the pistol wrapped at his side. Della up on the seat beside a young brother holding the reins, her face shadowed under a shawl, playing the grieving widow being carried home to see her ruin finished. Father Tom's rode ahead on the mule. The stars came out hard and cold over the salt flats, and the wagon wheels turned, and 30 miles fell behind them. They were 8 miles from Dry Fork when the riders came out of the dark. 3 of them, Crandall's men, spurring up onto the road with a lantern held high and a voice calling for the wagon to stand. The young brother drew the mules up. Della's heart went to a gallop, and she made herself sit still, still as she had stood at the fence rail, still as stone. The lantern came up level with the seat. A deputy's face, sweat shined, suspicious. "Where you bound this hour?" "To the town," Father Tom said, riding back easy into the light. "God's work, and the county's both. We've a burial." He gestured with his old hand toward the wagon bed. "Fever came to the mission. We're carrying a man to consecrated ground before the sun and the sickness get to him." The deputy's lantern swung toward the canvas. Under it, Elias lay with the ledger against his heart and did not breathe. "Fever," the deputy said. "The lung fever," said Father Tom's, and let the words sit in the cold air a moment. It moved through the cells like a wind. 2 are down yet. This one the Lord took Tuesday. He nudged the mule a half step closer. "Helpful. Terrible. You're welcome to look on him, deputy, and satisfy the sheriff. Draw back the cloth. He's ripe, but the county wants what the county wants." For one long breath the deputy sat his horse with the lantern in his hand and the canvas 6 feet from his boot. Della watched his throat move. She watched him weigh the sheriff's coin against a plague coffin. She watched contempt do the work that a lie alone could never have done. The deputy's lip curled, and he leaned back out of the smell he only imagined and jerked his chin at the road. "Get it in the ground," he said, "and keep your fever off the town." He wheeled his horse. "Go on, move." The wagon lurched forward, and in the lurch, jostled loose from the canvas where it had ridden all night against Elias's side, the oilcloth bundle with the pistol slid to the tailboard, and the pistol itself, dull and heavy, dropped over the edge and struck the road with a soft thud in the dust behind the wheels. No one on the wagon heard it. But the third rider, hanging back in the dark, walked his horse forward as the wagon pulled away, and looked down and saw the shape of it in the lantern fall. He swung down. He turned it in his hand. 2 letters caught the light, and the deputy, a slow smile starting, slid Marcus Thorne's pistol into the deep pocket of his coat and said nothing to anyone, because a man who finds a thing on a dark road learns first what it is worth before he gives it up. The wagon rolled on toward Dry Fork with the ledger safe and the pistol gone, and no one in it knew that half the proof had just fallen off the tailboard into the enemy's pocket. The meeting hall of Dry Fork had never held a court before. It had held dances and funerals and the reading of the drought relief, and now it held Judge Harlan Pryor behind a plank table with the county seal set in front of him, and it held 40 townsfolk on benches, the same 40, near enough, who had stood in the square and watched a well digger drop through a trap. They did not know yet what they had come to see. They thought they had come to see a widow lose her water. The recorder sat with his book. Marcus Thorne sat in a good coat with his hat on his knee, easy as a man who has already won. Sheriff Amos Crandall stood by the wall with his thumbs in his belt, 50 years of certainty in the set of his shoulders. Della Ransome walked to the front of the room in her mourning black, and every head turned to pity her, and she laid a stiff leather field ledger on the plank table in front of the judge. "Your Honor," she said, and her voice did not shake, though she had thought it would. "Before you close the sale of my land, I ask you to read this. It belonged to Josiah Vane. It is in his hand, and it says the deed to my springs was drawn and filed before my husband was ever dead, before he was ever charged, for the man sitting there in the good coat." The room stirred. Thorne did not move. Crandall pushed off the wall. "Your Honor, this is a grieving woman's paper. A widow with a book. She could have wrote it herself last night by candlelight. A dead man's ledger proves nothing but that dead men can't talk." He let his voice roll out over the benches, easy and broad, the same voice that had read the charge in the square. "I'd move we get on with the county's lawful business and let the poor woman go home." Judge Pryor did not pick up the book. He looked at Crandall a moment with the flat patience of a man who has heard sheriffs before. Then he looked at Della. "Ma'am, can any living soul stand behind this book? A ledger's only worth the hand that carried it and the eyes that saw. You've a dead agent's writing here. Have you got anything that breathes?" And the doors at the back of the meeting hall opened. The light came in from the street, and against it a man walked into the room, thin, stooped a little, moving careful, but walking on his own 2 feet. He came up the middle aisle between the benches, and a murmur went with him, low at first, then breaking, because the faces along the benches were turning and going white one by one as he passed. He stopped in the open space before the judge's table, in front of the whole town that had watched him die. He lifted his chin, and the purple cord of the rope scar showed plain around his throat. "I breathe, Your Honor," said Elias Ransome. "I saw Marcus Thorne shoot Josiah Vane on my own section line, and I've come to say so." A woman on the third bench dropped her cup. It cracked on the plank floor, loud in the dead silence, and no one looked at it. Elias raised his left hand. On the third finger, past a swollen knuckle, worn thin and bright, sat a scratched wedding band. "That's Elias Ransome," someone said, half a whisper, half a moan. "That's the well digger. We buried him. We stood right there and the voice ran out." Judge Pryor came half out of his chair, then sat, and his own face was not steady. "Sir, this court hanged a man by that name 3 weeks gone. If you are him, I will have you identified past all doubt before I let another word be said. Is there any person here who can name this man beyond a scar and a claim?" "I can," said Della. She crossed to Elias and took his left hand in both of hers and turned it to the light. "That band's been on his finger 19 years, she said. "He dug our well with it on. He never once took it off. He used to say he'd lose the finger first. It scratched across the face where a windlass chain caught it the summer we sunk the deep well. And inside, her voice caught and steadied. Inside it's engraved. Our 2 names and a date. The 8th of May, 1865. There's not a soul on this earth knows that date, but the man who married me and me." She worked the band up over the swollen knuckle, gentle, and held it out to the judge, and turned it so the light ran into the worn engraving. "Read it yourself, Your Honor." Pryor took the small warm ring. He tipped it to the window. He read what was scratched inside, and he read the date, and he looked up at Della's face and at the living man beside her, and something in the old judge settled hard and final. "It's the same hand's work as an old ring reads," he said quietly. "And no forger scratches a private date inside a band no one was ever meant to see." He set it down on the plank with great care. "Put it back on his finger, ma'am. The court is satisfied the man before it is Elias Ransome, and the court will now want to know how a man it hanged is standing in its light." So Elias told it. He told it plain, the way he had told Della in the infirmary. The short drop, the knot the brothers found, had been tied to break a neck slow and leave a pulse buried deep, the coffin carted to San Ismael for burial, and the faint beat found under a rope-crushed throat, and 3 weeks in a stone cell coming back from the far side of death. He named the 3rd cistern. He named the ledger under the judge's own hand. And the room, that had turned still for the hanging, turned still again, but it was a different stillness now, the kind that comes just before a thing breaks. Judge Pryor opened Vane's ledger. He read for a long while, the pages turning under his thumb, and no one spoke. Then he lifted his head and called for the county recorder's book, and the recorder brought it up the aisle on legs that had begun to wobble, and Pryor set the 2 open side by side. The deed to the Seco Springs section, he read aloud, so the whole hall could hear it, as recorded in this county's own book, filed for Marcus Thorne. He put his finger on Vane's ledger. And here, in the dead agent's hand, the same deed logged as drawn and filed on the 4th of the month, which is 11 days before Josiah Vane was shot. And 3 weeks before the widow Ransome was offered $1 for land the paper says was already sold. He looked up over the 2 books. A widow cannot sign away a section while her husband lives and breathes and holds the claim. This deed was signed by a hand that was not hers, for a sale that had not happened, over a man not yet dead. That, gentlemen, is not a deed. That is a forgery. And it is written plain in 2 books that cannot both be lying. Marcus Thorne stood up. He stood slow, and his knuckles were white on the brim of his hat, and his voice when it came was smooth still, but there was a thread pulled tight under it. "Your Honor, a book and a scarred man and a woman's tears. Where is the pistol? They say a pistol was found by Vane's body and then vanished. If this well-digger saw a murder, let him produce the weapon. Let him show this court one solid thing a man can hold. He can't, because there isn't one." He almost smiled. "I'll thank the court to end this show." It was, Della understood in that moment, his own trap laid for himself, for he had asked for the one thing he believed was safely gone, buried or lost, the pistol he had dropped and thought long swallowed by the desert. He asked for it because he was certain it could never come. And Judge Pryor turned his eyes to the back of the room, to the deputy standing there by the sheriff, sweating in a coat too warm for the hall. "Deputy," the judge said. "You've had your hand in that pocket since this man began to speak." A pistol was named. A pistol was found on the Mission Road, I'd wager, by a man who thought to learn its price before he spoke of it. Pryor's voice went cold and flat as the seal in front of him. "Empty your coat, now, in front of this court, or I'll hold you with the rest of them." The deputy's face came apart. He looked at Crandall. Crandall looked at nothing, and in the long, terrible silence the deputy reached into his coat, slow, and drew out the dull, heavy shape of it, and stood holding it as though it burned. "Set it on the table," Pryor said. He crossed the floor on legs that would barely carry him and set Marcus Thorne's pistol on the plank beside the ledger and the wedding band. The judge turned it with one finger. 2 letters bit up out of the grip into the light of the window for the whole hall to see. MT. Marcus Thorne looked at his own initials on his own pistol lying in open court, and the smooth thing in his face fell all the way in, and the gray came up under his skin like water rising in a well. He did not sit. He did not speak. There was nothing smooth left to say, and he had asked for it himself, and he stood there in his good coat with his mouth open on no words at all, while 40 of his neighbors looked at him and understood, all at once, everything. "Marcus Thorne," said Judge Pryor, "you are held for the murder of Josiah Vane and for the forgery of a county deed. You will be tried for both, and by the look of these 2 books and that pistol on my table, you will answer for both." Then the judge turned his head, without hurry, to the wall. Sheriff Crandall. Amos Crandall had not moved from the wall, but the wall was all he had now. 50 years of certainty, and it had come down to this in an afternoon. He took his thumbs out of his belt. He spread his hands and started the old broad voice going, the voice that had ruled the square. "Your Honor. Now, a sheriff can be fooled same as any man. If there's been a fraud worked here, I'm as wronged as. You arrested this man inside the hour," Pryor said, and did not raise his voice, and it cut clean through Crandall's like a wire through soft wood. "Out on a section line 8 miles from town, you were on him inside the hour. You blocked his wife's view of the scaffold. You tied, or let be tied, a knot meant to counterfeit a hanging, or you were the most incompetent hangman in this territory. And I don't think you're incompetent, Amos. I think you knew where to ride because you were told where to ride. And now you've had men out on a Mission Road hunting a corpse you buried, spending county coin to keep a dead man dead." He nodded to the 2 nearest men on the front bench, steady townsmen both. "Take his gun and hold him with Thorne. This court will learn the whole of what he knew and when." Crandall reached, for his authority, for his badge, for the room, for something, and found the room had turned its back. The neighbors who had stood still and silent while he read the charge in the square would not meet his eye now. The 2 men off the front bench came and took the pistol off his hip, and he let them, because there was nothing else to do, and the certainty went out of his shoulders all at once and left an old man standing against a wall. Judge Pryor let the room breathe a moment. Then he took up his pen. "On the matter of the forced sale of the Seco Springs section and the estate of Elias Ransome," he said, writing as he spoke, "this court finds the deed produced by Marcus Thorne to be a forgery, and the bank claim built upon it to be void. There being no dead man to close an estate around, the man being manifestly alive and standing before me, there is no forced sale. The Seco Springs section and the 320 acres of the Ransome claim are restored, whole and clear, to Elias and Della Ransome, this day." He signed it. He pressed the county seal into the wet ink, and let the record show the court's thanks to Father Tom's and the brothers of the Mission San Ismael, who sheltered an innocent man at risk to themselves until the law could be made to do its work. The county owes them a debt it can't file in any book. He set the pen down. The town of Dry Fork, that had stood in a square 3 weeks before and watched in silence while a well digger dropped through a trap and said not one word to stop it, came up off its benches. Not for a hanging this time. They rose the way people rise without deciding to, all together, for the man they had nearly buried, and a sound went up in the meeting hall. Ragged and ashamed and glad all at once, the sound of 40 people who had been wrong and had just been shown a way to be less wrong. Elias Ransome did not turn to face them. He did not point at Thorn going gray or Crandall against his wall. He humiliated no one. He reached out and took his wife's hand, the one that had slid the band back onto his finger, and he looked only at her, and to the whole room, and to none of it he said the only thing he had ever wanted to say. I only wanted to come home. 6 months put water back in the valley, and the drought broke in the 4th year the way droughts do, all at once and grudging, but the sweet water well the Ransomes had dug with their own hands had never gone dry through the worst of it, and now it ran for the whole of Seco Valley, for the town that rose too late, and the neighbors who looked away, water enough for all of them. Because Elias Ransome was not a man to shut a gate on thirsty people, not even the ones who had watched him hang. In the front window of the house on the 320 acres, a lamp burned every night. It had burned there 19 years as a beacon for a man out on the claim after dark, and it had burned there 3 weeks for a man Della thought was in the ground, and it burned there still, only now the man it called home was inside the house when it was lit, at the table, close enough to touch. She lit it anyway. Some habits are a kind of prayer, and you don't stop saying them just because they've been answered. The band sat on his finger, worn thinner and brighter than ever, scratched across the face where a windlass chain had caught it a lifetime ago, and inside it a date that a judge had read aloud in open court and that still belonged, in the end, only to the two of them. Marcus Thorn went to the territorial court, and then to the territorial prison, for the murder of Josiah Vane and the forging of a county deed, and he had a great deal of time to think about a pistol he was so sure would never surface that he demanded it in open court himself. And Amos Crandall, 50 years a lawman, learned in his own county jail that the county keeps no water sweeter than the well he tried to steal. Some truths get cut down before their time. They get buried in a hurry, with the town standing by, and everyone agrees it's finished and goes home. But the honest ones have a way of not staying down. They sit up in a stone room with a scar on their throat, and they wait for the right man to make the law look, and they come walking back up the aisle into the light when nobody's ready for them, carrying nothing but a dead man's ledger and a scratched gold ring and the plain, patient, unkillable truth. If Della's story reached you tonight, tell me the town you're watching from. I'd like to know how far it rides.